If you've ever had one of those really nasty, painful boils, or maybe you've experienced that nightmare where some leftover chicken salad gives you the absolute worst 6 hours of your life, then you have personally encountered the subject of today's video. We're talking about the genus Staphylococcus, a whole family of bacteria that is quite literally living on you right now. These organisms are mostly harmlessly colonizing your skin and mucous membranes. They're just background noise in our microbiome most of the time. But give them a window, a small cut, a surgical incision, or just the chance to grow in a bowl of food left on the counter, and they switch. They become one of the most dangerous, most adaptable human pathogens we know. They're the definition of a dual threat and a perfect example of an opportunistic pathogen. Today, we're going to chart everything from the physical structure of these bugs to their frightening genetic defenses. Our mission is to pull out the essential nuggets you need to know, understanding the specific arsenal they use to beat our immune system, and why they're constantly one step ahead of our antibiotics. This is the battle that gave us the superbug, MRSA. Let's start with the basics. If we were to look at these bacteria under a microscope, we'd see something instantly recognizable, which is actually how they got their name. We classify them as gram-positive cocci, so they're round cells that hold on to a dark stain. But the key thing is they clump together. The name Staphylococcus literally comes from the Greek for bunch of grapes. They look exactly like miniature bunches of grapes under magnification. Staphylococci are non-motile, non-spore-forming, and are either aerobic or facultatively anaerobic organisms, although a few strains are obligate anaerobes. Colonies produced after 18 to 24 hours of incubation are medium size, about 4 to 8 millimeters, and appear cream-colored, white, or rarely light gold, and buttery-looking. But beyond how they look, what makes them so successful? Not just as colonizers, but as really tough pathogens to get rid of. It's their durability, their sheer toughness. The research is crystal clear on this. These are not fragile organisms. They're hardy and resistant to heat and drying. This means they can survive outside the body for a very long time. They can live happily on inanimate objects, a doorknob, a towel, a bed rail in a hospital, what we call fomites. And that's why hand washing is so critical. It's the absolute first line of defense against these things. It always comes back to basic hygiene. Now, this description of round, clumpy, durable gram-positive bacteria could also fit their cousins, the Streptococci. So how do labs tell them apart? We use a really simple chemical reaction called the catalase test. This draws the first clean line between the families. Staphylococci produce an enzyme called catalase, so when we drip hydrogen peroxide on the sample, it immediately generates oxygen bubbles. They're catalase-positive. Their cousins, the Streptococci, are catalase-negative, no bubbles. It's that simple. There are some rare strains of Staphylococci that are fastidious, requiring carbon dioxide, hemin, or menadione for growth. These so-called small colony variants, or SCVs, grow on media containing blood, forming colonies about 1/10 the size of wild-type strains, even after 48 hours or more of incubation. Some species are beta-hemolytic on blood agar. Once we know we have a Staphylococcus, which species are we most worried about? Medically, really 3 species dominate the whole discussion. You have the undisputed heavyweight champion, Staphylococcus aureus. That's the most virulent, the most common pathogen. And then you have 2 others that are often less dramatic but still cause serious infections in their own specific niches, S. epidermidis and S. saprophyticus. This brings us to the next critical dividing line in the lab, which separates the king, S. aureus, from the rest of the family, the coagulase test. Coagulase is an enzyme that almost all isolates of S. aureus secrete, and it acts like a biological clotting agent. It causes citrate plasma to clot right in the test tube, and that's a huge virulence factor in the body because it's basically building a shield around itself. It builds a fibrin coat around the bacteria, which restricts the ability of our immune cells, our white blood cells, to get in and fight them. It's literally wrapping itself in our body's own defense material. That is incredibly clever, a brilliant evolutionary trick. So if a bacterium has this enzyme, it's coagulase-positive. Everything else gets lumped together as coagulase-negative staphylococci, or just cons for short. You can often see this difference before you even run the tests. S. aureus colonies frequently have this characteristic yellow or golden hue, hence the name aureus, which means golden. The cons, on the other hand, are generally just white or gray, pretty unremarkable. Coagulase-negative staphylococci, the sneaky threats. Let's talk about those con species. They don't have the golden glow, they don't have that clotting enzyme, but they're far from harmless, especially in hospitals. The cons are the sneaky threats. They're often linked to medical devices. Take S. epidermidis, for example. It's common, normal skin flora, so it shows up on cultures all the time. But it is a primary culprit in infections that involve any kind of implanted material, heart valves, artificial joints, catheters, you name it. Anything foreign you put in the body. And what lets it be so successful on those surfaces? Its mechanism is beautifully adapted to the modern hospital. Epidermidis produces this sticky, extracellular polysaccharide material. The sources call it slime, or more technically, polysaccharide intercellular adhesin. This slime lets the bacteria stick really firmly to synthetic surfaces. And critically, it creates a physical barrier, a biofilm. And that's a barrier that drugs can't get through. Antimicrobial agents just can't penetrate it. It's like wrapping the whole colony in biological cling film to survive a chemical attack. A slow-moving but very serious threat. What about the third one? Saprophyticus. It has a totally different target. It has carved out a very specialized niche. It causes urinary tract infections, specifically cystitis, almost exclusively in sexually active young women. It's part of the normal vaginal flora, but if it gets into the urinary tract, it can cause problems. In the lab, we distinguish it from S. epidermidis by its natural resistance to an antibiotic called novabiocin. It's a specialist. Now that we've covered the family portrait, let's pivot back to the powerhouse, the main event, Staphylococcus aureus. This is where it gets really interesting because this organism has this unbelievable arsenal of toxins and cell wall factors that let it cause disease in so many ways, either through physical invasion, pure chemical poisoning or intoxication, or a combination of both. Immune evasion, protein A and the microcapsule. We have to start with how it actively fights and blinds our immune system. There are two components built right into its cell wall that are just brilliant at this. The most famous one is protein A, a master of disguise. When our body makes an antibody to attack a bacteria, that antibody has two ends. There's the V region, which latches onto the bacteria, the specific part. And then there's the FC region, which is like the handle. It's the part that our immune cells recognize and grab onto to eat the invader. It's the grab here sign for the immune system. And what protein A does is it binds directly to that handle, to the FC region of our IgG antibody. It covers the handle. It essentially turns the antibody upside down. The immune cell can't grab on, the tag doesn't work, and the bacterium is rendered strongly antiphagocytic. It stops the immune system from eating it. It's actively using our own weapon against us, blinding the targeting system. Incredible. Beyond that, most clinical isolates also use a simpler physical shield, a thin polysaccharide microcapsule. And this just makes the bacteria slippery, physically harder for the white blood cells to engulf. Just another layer of defense. Direct attack, cytolytic toxins. But evasion isn't enough for S. aureus. It also makes toxins that directly kill our cells. So it's hiding and attacking at the same time. A major class of these are the cytolytic and pore-forming toxins. We often call them hemolysins. The alpha toxin, for instance, is extremely effective. It actually polymerizes into these little tube-like structures that literally punch holes, or pores, into our cell membranes. And when you pierce the membrane, the cell suffers osmotic lysis. It swells up and bursts. It's a direct assault. And we can't talk about these toxins without mentioning pantenvalentine leukocidin, or PVL. This one is critical. It's another pore-forming toxin, but it's highly specific. It targets and lyses our polymorphonuclear neutrophils, our PMNs, our frontline white blood cells, the first responders. So by destroying the PMNs, PVL just wipes out the immediate immune response at the site of infection. Which is why PVL-positive strains are so feared, they eliminate that first wave of defense. And here's a key clinical connection. PVL is predominantly produced by community-acquired MRSA strains, and its presence is a huge part of why those specific strains cause such severe, aggressive infections, those deep necrotizing wounds and pneumonias. Toxin-mediated diseases, the superantigens. Now let's transition to the most dramatic diseases, the ones mediated purely by toxins. These aren't just about invasion, they're about the bacteria producing chemical signals called superantigens. This is a truly spectacular mechanism. A normal antigen, when it's presented to your immune system, might stimulate, say, 0.01% of your T cells. It's a very controlled, specific response. Superantigens, they ignore all of that. They bypass the normal mechanism and they force the activation of up to 20% of all of your T cells. Wait, 20%? So they're kicking off an immune response hundreds, thousands of times larger than necessary. Exactly. It's a total immune system meltdown. You get this catastrophic release of signaling molecules, cytokines, which causes systemic inflammation, tissue damage, and ultimately shock. Toxic shock syndrome. The classic textbook example of this is toxic shock syndrome, or TSS, caused by toxic shock syndrome toxin 1, or TSST1. It's that superantigen circulating through the body triggering the whole cascade: high fever, a distinctive rash, followed by severe hypotension and often multi-organ damage. The fascinating historical note is the link back in the late 70s and early 80s to the use of hyperabsorbent tampons. The materials and the high absorbency created a microenvironment that actually favored the rapid growth of the S. aureus strains, making TSST1. The toxin was produced right there and then absorbed into the bloodstream, causing all the systemic effects even without a major invasive infection happening. Staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome. And then there's that physically horrifying condition where the skin just peels away: staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome, or SSSS. This is caused by another superantigen called exfoliatin. But instead of causing systemic shock, exfoliatin has a very specific target. It acts as a protease that cleaves desmoglein 1, which is the protein that holds our skin cells together. It's literally dissolving the glue. The cleavage results in these large, superficial blisters, bulli, and that marked peeling and scaling that gives the skin that scalded look. And it's most common in babies, newborns, and infants. And remarkably, the toxin can cause these lesions even if the bacterium itself is, say, only in a distant eye infection. The toxin travels to the skin to do its work. Staphylococcal food poisoning. Finally, let's touch on the really common one: staphylococcal food poisoning. Why is it so fast and so violent? The speed is the key clue. Food poisoning from staph enterotoxins, which are also heat-stable superantigens, has an incubation period of less than 6 hours, often much faster. And why is that? Because you are not developing an infection. The symptoms, the nausea, the severe vomiting, are caused by immediate intoxication. The bacteria already grew in the food, produced the toxin, and you ate the preformed toxin. The poison was already made in protein-rich or salty foods like ham, custards, potato salad. And crucially, these toxins are highly heat-stable. So reheating the food won't help. Reheating might kill the bacteria, but it will not destroy the toxin. You can still get severe food poisoning. It's biology's preformed grenade. Which brings us to the most pressing challenge with this organism today: the antibiotic resistance crisis. We went from penicillin to methicillin, and now we live in the age of the superbug. The resistance story is just a relentless march of bacterial innovation. Very quickly after penicillin was introduced, nearly all S. aureus strains became resistant. How? They acquired genes for an enzyme called penicillinase, which just breaks the drug down. So we adapted. We started using beta-lactamase-resistant penicillins, like methicillin. And that worked for a time, but then came MRSA. That was the next inevitable step. Methicillin-resistant S. aureus acquired an entirely new mechanism, a custom-built way to ignore our drugs. The bacteria acquired a gene called MICA, and that gene codes for a distinct penicillin-binding protein, or PBP. We call the new version PBP2A. So if you think of penicillin and methicillin as keys designed to jam the locks the bacteria use to build their cell wall, PBP2A is a completely redesigned lock. This new lock has a remarkably low affinity for all of our beta-lactam antibiotics. Our keys are useless. The entire class of drugs is ineffective. It's vital we distinguish between the two major types of MRSA: hospital-acquired MRSA, or HMRSA, and community-acquired MRSA, or CMRSA. This is a major clinical distinction. HMRSA is the traditional superbug. You find it in vulnerable patients, the elderly, chronically ill, people in long-term care. And it's multi-drug resistant, very often, yes. It ignores methicillin and a bunch of other non-beta-lactam drugs, so it's hard to treat, but often a bit less acutely virulent. And then CMRSA, the one that made headlines on sports teams, targets young, healthy people. And it is often much more virulent. Remember, this is the strain that often carries that destructive PVL toxin, leading to those severe skin abscesses and necrotizing pneumonias. But here's the critical insight, the nugget that shows how dynamic this is. Their antibiotic susceptibility patterns are different. And this is the surprise. While CMRSA is resistant to methicillin, it is often susceptible to a broader range of the older, non-beta-lactam drugs like ciprofloxacin or clindamycin. Unlike the HA strain, so the more dangerous street version can sometimes be easier to treat with alternative drugs than the hospital version. This is absolutely vital for doctors to know. And finally, when facing the worst strains, we use vancomycin as the last resort. But even that is starting to fail us. It is the next line under threat. Vancomycin has been our go-to for severe MRSA, but we've seen this steady, frightening increase in resistance to it. So what's next? This forces clinicians to use newer, highly specialized alternatives like linezolid and daptomycin, and it just raises the constant concern about how long we can stay ahead of this bug's evolution. So what does this all mean for you? We have this bacterium, Staphylococcus, that's a completely normal colonizer of our skin, yet it has this extraordinarily advanced arsenal of toxins and enzymes that lets it cause everything from a pimple to fatal septic shock, and it's constantly evolving to defeat our best medicines. The overwhelming takeaway really has to be the effectiveness of simple control. Back to the basics. Because staphylococci are carried so commonly, and because they're so hardy on surfaces, basic infection control, especially thorough hand hygiene, is still the single most potent tool we have against it. And here's a final provocative thought for you to consider. Despite the immense global health threat posed by S. aureus, and despite its powerful evasion techniques like protein A, infection with S. aureus does not give you strong or long-lasting immunity. We know this because people get staph infections over and over again throughout their lives. You're always susceptible. So given the bacterium's incredible ability to hide from and destroy our defenses, the profound biological challenge remains. Why, after decades of intense research, has the scientific community been unable to develop an effective vaccine against this continuously evolving, ubiquitous organism? That's something to think about as you prepare for your ASCP exam. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, sometimes the most powerful defense is just washing your hands.